Welcome everybody to the first episode of Rocco's Rundown, first official episode. Clearly I haven't changed. I'm recording the same day as the very first episode, but let's get into it. So first of all, we're starting with the NL West Division. Now I know you can see my predictions, some of the tabs up, but we're just going to go kind of straight into it. So, starting with the NL West, the offseason has been pretty crazy for the NL West, especially if you're not a Dodgers fan. The Dodgers added a complete haul. I mean, they won the World Series, and quite frankly, they got significantly better, which is hard to do in all sports, but especially baseball. So before I get into everything, I'm just going to go into, strict rankings of what I think will happen this season. So I think the Dodgers will finish in first place. I think the Diamondbacks will finish in second. The Padres will finish in third. Giants fourth. Rockies fifth. Which, not too many surprises there. Some people might be a little shocked that the Diamondbacks are second, or the Padres are, third, vice versa. But yeah, we're gonna go into it. So quickly, we'll go over the over-under projections for the NL West. The Dodgers at 103. The Diamondbacks are at 85.5. The Padres are at 89.5. The Giants are at 79.5. And the Rockies are at 60.5. Quickly, I think the Dodgers go over. I think their roster is insane. I know it's hard to win 100 games of baseball. Nobody did last year. But the Dodgers, they're just a very complete team. And outside of detrimental injuries, I think it's hard to say that they can't win 104 games. Diamondbacks, again, I think will go over last year. Actually, I can pull that up. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of their wins last year. Diamondbacks had 89 wins in 2024, and I think roughly they got a little bit better, especially pitching. I like their rotation a lot more. I like their bullpen a lot more. Lineup, you could say, maybe got a little bit worse, but remember, last season they put up the most runs in all of baseball in the regular season. The most out of any team, including the Dodgers. So, offensively, you lose a guy like Jock. You lose Christian Walker. You lose Josh Bell. But you add a couple decent guys in Grichuk and Mancini. But the bigger story is you add Corbin Burnes. And I, as a Mets fan, would have loved to get Corbin Burnes, obviously with the way our offseason played out. I'm not nearly upset that we didn't get him, but Corbin Burnes is a generational, top-end pitcher in this league even to this day. And he's 30, 31, but he's still a top-end ace. You saw it in the playoffs. He gave up one run, and unfortunately that was the game-winning run, but can't stop Bobby Witt. Anyway, where were we? Yeah, so I think they'll go over 85.5. I think it just makes too much sense. They won 89 last year, and I think they're generally a better team than this year. The Padres, now if we look at the Padres won... How many games did the Padres win last year? Padres won 93, which is intriguing. I don't think they're going to go over. I think they will go under. I'm a little low on the Padres, as I think a lot of baseball watchers and off-season trackers have been. They lost a lot this offseason, and we'll get into it more, but I think their losses just outweigh their gains significantly, and I think with the issues with their front office, I think those can be big issues, especially come trade deadline, where maybe they are a potential playoff team contending, but their front office is dealing with so much issues and not wanting to add that they're not going to get better. And we see that the All-Star break, or not the All-Star break, sorry, the trade deadline is one of the most important parts of a season, year in and year out. You can go back to the 2021 Braves. You can go to this year, Dodgers adding Jack Flaherty. Adding guys at the break are crucial to winning a World Series, and I don't think the Padres are going to do it, and I think that will hurt them, especially in the second half of the season. The Giants are tough. Last year they won 80, so they just went over the 79.5. I want to say they barely get over, but I think it's going to be a tough season for the Giants again. I don't think playoffs is in their sight. I could be wrong. We'll go into it, but I think they'll go. I think they'll barely go over, maybe 80, 81. Similar to last year. Their losses and gains kind of outweigh each other or balance each other out. And then the Rockies. The Rockies last year finished with 61 wins, and they're going for 60 and a half. I'm a little bit higher on the Rockies. The rotation's horrible, plain and simple. Their bullpen is also pretty bad, but they got some arms out there that are not common names, but good funky windups that I think, they're going to be a fun team. They have some really good young guys in their lineup that we'll get into, but I really think they're going to be good. Now, when we look at the Dakota projections, as you can see, Dodgers over, Diamondbacks over, Padres under, Giants under, and Rockies under. I don't think the Rockies will be 55. That's pretty bad, but you never know. Fangraphs, they're a little bit lower, 96 under, but then they're over on the Diamondbacks, under on the Padres, a little bit over on the Giants, and a little bit over on the Rockies. So overall, it probably in the middle of all these numbers, obviously, but I think they're definitely right on the Diamondbacks and the Padres. But yeah, so now we're going to go into team by team. These are the rankings into the division, so I think the Dodgers are going to be one across the board. I mean, I think you compare them to any team, the number one lineup, rotation, bullpen, it doesn't matter. I mean, the team they've built on paper is great. Now, we know baseball is not on paper. It's played on a field. Things happen, injuries, whatever. But lineup-wise, you can't really argue. And I think the Diamondbacks are too. Listen, they put up the most amount of runs in baseball last year. Now, I get it. They lose Walker and Peterson. But they add a guy like Grichuk, who's not horrible. Mancini is probably not going to get that much run, but you never know. And they got young guys that can very easily take off next year. I mean, Carroll had a bad first half, kind of picked it up in the second half. And they just have got a lot of really good young prospects that could make their way up in the next year or two. And I just think the young guys are going to hit, and I think they're still going to hit. But it is close when you compare them to the Padres. I mean, they had the Padres at 3. I mean, if we look at the Padres lineup, they got some heavy hitters: Arias, Tatis, Merrill, Machado, Cronenworth. But then the bottom of the lineup kind of fades out, and I know that they're still going to be a really good hitting team. But you lose a guy like Ha-Seong Kim, you lose a guy like Jurickson Profar, you lose a guy who was clutch for you in Higashioka, the home run stroker. I mean, they lost a lot and didn't gain, and I think that's going to hurt their rotation, obviously. But obviously it also hurts their lineup. So I think their lineup takes a little bit of a step back. I think it's still third best in the division, but I just don't think it will be as much of a show. Much as when you would tune into the Padres, it was like a Broadway show. Like, you had to watch. It was just fireworks, and it was great. And I think you're gonna see kind of a little bit of a decline. Even if you look at a guy like Machado, who I think is, out of this world. He's getting up there. He's not a spring chicken anymore. He's 30. He's gonna be 33. Arias, I mean, the guy hits. That's all he does. But who's to say now that he's in the field, it might not affect his hitting? I think overall their lineup will take a little bit of a decline compared to last season. The Giants are interesting because I think they got better hitting wise, especially when you add a guy like Adames, who I think is great. But that's about it, and you lose the combination of Canna and Conforto, which are not they're not guys that are selling tickets for the ballpark, but they are decent enough offensive guys that when you get toward this bottom third of the lineup, especially as Wilmer Flores gets older, we know what Patrick Bailey is. We know he's a phenomenal defender, and we think he'll take a leap. But we don't know yet, and that's not saying he can't. I just I think the depth is a little bit less than last year, but obviously they get way more firepower with Adonis towards the top of the lineup. So I like where the lineup is, but compared to the division, I would put it at 4. And the Rockies lineup, it's fun. I like Brenton Doyle. I like Tovar. McMahon has some inconsistencies, but I think he can be really good too. And I like Toglia. Toglia hits home runs. Now, does he get on base? No, not good at all. He strikes out 30% of the time, but he'll rip a ball. He will smoke a ball over the fence whenever you want, and especially in a field like Coors Field. There's going to be home runs. They're going to be a fun team. They're not obviously they're projected 60.5, so they're probably not going to be a good team, and I don't think they will. But they're still a fun baseball team. So now when we get into the rotations, it's the Dodgers. I mean, all right, we'll go through it. Just because I didn't really show it here for their lineup. But if we just look at their lineup, the worst WRC plus I see here is Tommy Edman. Tommy Edman's their worst WRC plus hitter. Their worst quote-unquote hitter on the team. And maybe Hyun-Sung Kim. But don't worry, they have Chris Taylor off the bench and Kike Hernandez off the bench. I mean, do we not think they're going to hit? But anyway, back to the rotations. They have the 3 best Japanese pitchers we saw 2 years ago in the World Baseball Classic on their team. Yamamoto, Sasaki, Ohtani. I mean, Shohei Ohtani. Yes, he may not be ready to go day one. They may not even use him. They may have him as I don't even know, another bullpen guy. Great. Obviously, they're going to pitch him. But their rotation is stacked top to bottom. You have Yamamoto, who started out a little bit rough last year and then turned it on, figured it out, and you saw him in the playoffs. Blake Snell is a second-half monster. Even if he has an okay first half, as your number 2, you're pretty damn happy with that. Ask the Giants. Tyler Glasnow. He's probably the biggest question mark in the rotation. If he can stay healthy and if he can, give you what he gave you with the Rays, then yeah. Tyler Glasnow might be their best pitcher in their rotation. He's their 3. Rocco, he is another question mark, but I think he'll have another Yamamoto-type season. I mean, coming out of the World Baseball Classic, a lot of people felt that Rocco was the best pitcher. Yamamoto did pretty good. I think it's going to be the same for Rocco. Gonsolin, I mean, they have a ton of guys. May, Kershaw. I mean, if I can go into their depth. Gavin Stone. Who's the young guy? I really can't. I'm blanking on his name right now. Hold on, Dodgers. Bobby Miller. There we go. Sorry. Bobby Miller. Is he their 8th best pitcher? Like, this rotation is clearly one of the best in the league, assuming they can stay healthy, which could be a big issue. Now here, it was tough when I was coming up with it, but I think the Padres rotation is 2, solely off the fact that when I look at their rotation, Cease, King, and Darvish, I think as a top 3 are more impressive to me than when you look at a Diamondbacks team who has Burns, Gallen, and Kelly. Now, I think Burns is the best of all those pitchers, and I think Gallen could be the 3rd best, if not the 2nd best, depending. But to me, the Padres rotation has a better ability to dominate 1 through 3 than I would say the Diamondbacks rotation does. And Pivetta as a 4th pitcher is great. He's great. So the Padres are going to have a good rotation. They're going to have a good lineup. It's not like they are going to be a bad team. I just, like I had alluded to earlier, I don't think they're going to be willing to add at the deadline. And I think that's going to be the biggest issue for them making a push for the playoffs and also becoming a better team for the playoffs. And then, as we can see at the bottom, it's kind of consistent, 4-5, 4-5. Giants rotation is solid. Webb is great. Robbie Ray is pretty good. He's, Cy Young type caliber pitcher. Not my favorite, but you have a Verlander, you have a Hicks who can throw. Again, it's a solid rotation. But I think when you look at the rest of the West, especially these big three, I just think it's missing an arm to really be in that contention. Yeah, so I think it's a clear tier, and I think it's another clear tier between the Giants, maybe a couple tiers, and the Rockies, because the Rockies, their rotation. I like German Marquez. That's about it. Even his projected is a 4.67, which obviously his projections are not great. We know that, but even then, maybe Marquez is their, diamond in the rough. But even at his best, he's not on the level of an ace. He's just not an ace. Middle of the rotation, maybe a 2 if you have a really good ace, but he's not ace material. But that's what you're getting out of the Rockies. And then when we move to the bullpen, which can go coincide, especially playoff time, with the rotation depending on depth. Again, the Dodgers bullpen. You add Tanner Scott. You add Kirby Yates. You bring back everybody. If we look at their projected bullpen, Scott, Yates, Trinan, Kopech, Vesia, Banda. I mean, those 6, easily the best 6 in baseball. And then towards the end of the season, you might have a Glasnow. Well, probably not Glasnow, but you might. Honestly, you might. If Roki balls out, you might have Glasnow coming out of the pen. Like, they're just the deepest team in baseball I've seen in a while on paper. But again, things can change. And you have to keep an open mind that they're not going to be perfect. And there might be a stretch where they're struggling with injuries, which could be their weakness, but I think there's just so much depth everywhere that even with injuries, they're still going to have a World Series contending roster with their best 2 guys in every part of their team missing. Like, that's how deep this team is. Rotation-wise, we go to the Diamondback, or bullpen-wise, there's a couple decent guys in here I like. I like Martinez, Puck, Ginkel. I like Mantiply. I think Monty, coming out of the bullpen, could be good for them. I know he kind of had a bad year last year, but I like Jordan Montgomery. I like watching him on the Yankees. When they traded him to the Cardinals, I remember Yankee fans were pissed. And rightfully so. He was a great pitcher, and they needed more pitching, and they got rid of pitching, and it kind of hurt their season. But either way, Jordan Montgomery, I think, has potential to be really good out of the bullpen, and maybe he does become a backline starter. But either way, I like their bullpen. It's not a wow factor. This is an amazing bullpen. It's not gonna be a top end, but it's gonna be a solid bullpen that isn't gonna blow enough games for them where it's like they don't make the playoffs and it's like, wow, if only they had the bullpen. Padres are again in a very similar ballpark for me. Suarez, Adam, Estrada, Moerhan, Matsui, even Hoying. I think it's gonna be a very similar thing to the Diamondbacks. It's gonna be a very solid bullpen. Now you lose Tanner Scott, which is huge for them in a negative way. But I still think it's a solid bullpen. And I keep saying it, the Padres are not going to be a bad team. They're projected 89.5 wins. Like, they're going to be a good team. But I think there is more room for error this season compared to last year. Or less room for error, sorry. And I think there's a chance that they could miss the playoffs with how good the NL is, which is kind of crazy to think because they have been consistently one of the top end teams in the NL each year, going in the playoffs, in the regular season. Like, they have been a consistent 90-win team with playoff success the past 3 seasons, or 89 technically, in 2022. But still, they have been a consistent 90 win, hitting all around good team, and I think they are still that. But like I said, I think their inability to add at the break or the deadline is going to be a major issue. We go to San Fran, Walker, Rogers, Duvall, Miller, some decent guys, but I think it's a slight tier below where I would have the Diamondbacks and the Padres. Could be in that 18 to 15 range, maybe 15 to 20, a little below middle of the pack, but I don't think it's going to be a major issue come regular season. And then the Rockies, there's not much to go over. They have some guys that I saw in person with some funky deliveries, but that's about it. If you look at their projections, it's not good. ERAs, it's the lowest one I see is a 4.64. Pitching is not a thing for Colorado. So those are the quick numbers, and then I just want to go through some off-season additions and losses that made me also look at how they did last year and see why I ranked them the way I did. So if we look at the Dodgers, we got quite a list. Their additions include Blake Snell, Michael Conforto, Blake Trinan, Teoscar Hernandez, Hyun-Sung Kim, Roki Sasaki, Tanner Scott, Kirby Yates, Kike Hernandez, Clayton Kershaw. Obviously some of the guys are coming back, but just blank additions: Snell, Conforto, Hyun-Sung Kim, Sasaki, Tanner Scott. Those additions alone are the equivalent to about 70% of baseball combined. It's insane, the offseason they had. When we go to the Diamondbacks, their additions are Mancini, Grichuk, and Burns. But on the flip side, they lose Christian Walker, Josh Bell, and Kevin Newman. And Jock Peterson. So you can argue that, does Corbin Burns and Grichuk add up to Walker, Bell, and Peterson? And I think it does, because Grichuk is a solid bat, so he's going to outweigh whoever you want to attribute that to, whether it's Walker or Bell, hitting. But pitching, you adding Corbin Burns, what that does, obviously you add Corbin Burns, your rotation gets better. But the reason why it gets significantly better for the Diamondbacks is because letting Burns be your ace now allows Gallen to be your 2, which is, mathematically speaking, makes sense. But what that does for Gallen is that takes immense pressure off of Gallen. Because Gallen, I don't think, was an ace-level guy, but I think he can be a 2, like an Aaron Nola level pitcher, day in and day out. So letting him kind of take a back seat and letting Burns, Burns basically being like, I got you, don't worry, I got you. I think that's huge for a rotation that just needed to be better last year, considering their lineup was number 1 in producing runs and on base percentage and a lot more other stats. They scored a lot of runs and they missed the playoffs by a game because they had no pitching. The pitching was bad. Not horrific, but bad. Not good enough to get them in. But now you add Burns. That just exponentially increases their ability to keep games under a certain run limit. And yes, you lose some hitting, but you gain the pitching. You gain so much more pitching that it outweighs that run loss per game. So I think they definitely got better, and they won 89 games last year. So looking pretty good for the Diamondbacks, even with their losses. Also, quickly, I forgot to mention Dodgers subtractions: Walker Buehler, Jack Flaherty. You traded Gavin Lux. You lose Joe Kelly. Again, not major guys considering the immense additions that they had, but I just wanted to be fair and add those in there. That takes care of the Diamondbacks. Now the Padres, and this is why I think I'm so low on the Padres, is their additions are nowhere near their subtractions. So addition-wise, Nick Pivetta, Jason Hayward. Nick Pivetta is, I think for what they're getting him for, is great as a 4 for a pretty good contract. I think he'll be great for them. He was pretty good with the Red Sox last year, which was a much worse pitching situation, bullpen situation, hitting situation. So he's going to a better situation for himself. So I think he will do better. Jason Hayward, I mean, are we really going crazy? Do they really think that adding Jason Hayward at 36 years old is going to be the difference in losing Ha-Sung Kim, Jurickson Profar, and Kyle Higashioka? No, it's not even close. Profar, when he robbed that home run, you felt right then and there like, wow, Profar is meant for this team. Like, he's got the swagger, he's got the personality to be a Padre. He had that little chip on your shoulder where you're like, yeah, this is a Broadway type show team. Like, this is an entertaining baseball team that was put out there to entertain us and also be a really good team. We saw in the offseason, the Dodgers talked about their biggest threat was the Padres. They went down. The Padres were up 2-1. Now, they lost the series, and the Dodgers went on to win the whole thing. But the Padres had a chance this offseason to add and to really put themselves in the conversation of the biggest threat to the Dodgers. And instead, they lost significant amounts hitting. And then you also lose Tanner Scott, which you trade for. You give up prospects. You trade for Tanner Scott. He is amazing for you, and you just let that go in the second half of the season. So I just think they lose so much, and they don't really gain enough where, yes, I think they are a good team, and I think they still can maybe squeak it into the playoffs. But at best, I don't think they win more than maybe a round in the wild card, if that. I mean, they had the opportunity to really staple themselves in this rivalry like the Giants and the Dodgers had and become one of those teams where it's like, wow, do you remember the Padres in the 2020s? And instead, they kind of took a back seat and let guys go and didn't add enough to even be as good as last year. And it's really, I think that's the most frustrating part, probably for Padres fans, but also just general baseball fans. Like, the Padres were a legit threat last year. They went up 2-1 to the Dodgers. They did lose, but they were up 2-1 in a 5-game series. And they could have had a great offseason, and instead they lose. Not only do they lose, you let Tanner Scott go to the Dodgers, which is just mind-boggling. The guy who was your best matchup against Ohtani and Freeman and all the lefties they had over there, the guys that you're going to face 15 plus times in a season this year, well, 15 games, so whatever, 45 plus times in a season, you had the best card you could get, right? The best card. He's probably the best lefty bullpen arm in the league, or at least in your division, and you just kind of let him go. And then you let him go to the one team you basically couldn't let him go to. Now, I know they're dealing with front office issues, but front office issues I kind of take as irrelevant in this situation because you were right there. And you knew the Dodgers were going to add. You saw they started adding as soon as free agency opened. You got to be with them, and they just didn't do that. Giants additions include Verlander, Adames, and extending Chapman, which I love the extension of Matt Chapman. I think it'll do a lot for him confidence-wise. Take a little bit of pressure off. I like Willy Adames. Before the Mets wound up signing Juan Soto, I honestly thought we weren't going to, so I thought it was going to be, all right, let's go get Adames, let's go get Alonso, let's go get like a Tyler O'Neill. Let's fill in the contract value of Soto and make ourselves all around better. But obviously we got Soto. But Adames is a player I was very high on. I obviously didn't like watching him this past season in the playoffs, him barking at with Jesse Winker. But Adames is a phenomenal player, and he's got pretty good contract value, and I think that's a big bat add. On the flip side, they lose Canna and Conforto, which I had said earlier are somewhat... They're not unnoticeable. They're decent bats. They're everyday guys. So they're going to lose a little bit of lineup depth. A little bit. but they're going to be a much better lineup all around compared to last year. But I think the big loss, especially second half, is a guy like Snell. And again, similar to the Padres, you lose Snell, and not only do you lose him to the Dodgers. You can't let that happen. I mean, you just can't. I mean, it happened, and it's whatever. But again, the Dodgers, who have this amazing left-handed line, a bunch of really big lefty bats, you can't let your ace in the hole, your number one card, go to them. You can't let it happen. You lose Snell. And I think a lot of people thought they were going to lose Snell, but there was still the opportunity that they could have held on to Snell if they opened up the pocketbook. And I know I'm a Mets fan, so it's a little ironic coming from me about opening up the pocketbook, but a lot of these owners have a ton of money. So I think the Giants, roster-wise, may be a little bit worse, but I think they're going to be pretty consistent with last year, which is why I think that 79.5 is a pretty good line, but I go slightly over. And the Rockies, their additions include Thairo Estrada. Not a household name, not an amazing player, solid player. He'll be in that lineup. That's about it. And they lose nobody except for Charlie Blackmon, who retires, which Chuck Nasty, phenomenal player. They will miss that beard. They'll miss that player. But overall, not much going on in Colorado, which seems to be pretty consistent. That's just the Rockies. They're consistently pretty bad, but they're consistent at least. I do miss the days of Nolan Arenado, Ian Desmond, even Troy Tulo. They definitely have had some fun players. I'm praying Chris Bryant has a bounce back here. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I would love to see that. And as for the NL West, maybe we want to make some bold predictions, so we'll do this kind of on the fly. So hitting-wise, who I think is the biggest X factor in this lineup? I would say the biggest X factor in this lineup is probably biggest X factor. I'm gonna go with no, not Conforto. Who do I want to go with? I want to go with given the depth that they have at a lot of these positions, I'm gonna go with Will Smith, and this is why I say Will Smith. Will Smith is one of the most consistent ball players year in and year out. But I really want to see, because every year Will Smith kind of gets forgotten. There's always like a catcher who does phenomenal, and people are like, oh yeah, like he's the best catcher in the NL. Wilson Contreras, or JT Realmuto, or William Contreras. There's just always a catcher who just has a better season and is a slight step ahead of Will Smith, where you kind of just forget Will Smith, but he's the definition of consistent. And I think he's the biggest X factor to making this lineup even better. If Will Smith goes out there and does even a little bit better than he has in the past, that lineup will be just so deep. I mean, depth-wise, if Conforto is shaky or Hernandez isn't as good as last year, you have Chris Taylor, you have you have Kike Hernandez, Rojas, you have a bunch of young guys like Outman. Same thing with Edman. Like, you have the depth at a lot of those positions. Catcher's a position that there's naturally not as much depth of, especially hitting, and I really think Will Smith is the X factor for the hitting, for the lineup, per se, for the Dodgers. Pitching, I think I had alluded to it earlier, but it's Tyler Glasnow. If Tyler Glasnow is as good as he was with the Rays and is healthy, which is a big issue, he doesn't usually go over 120 innings in a season. But if he can do that, this rotation becomes that much more nasty. You know what you're going to get out of Yamamoto. You know the second half you're going to get out of Snell. You know what you're going to most likely get out of Roki. He's going to be a very solid pitcher. And then you have guys like May and Gonsolin and Kershaw. They have the depth. Bobby Miller. I mean, the pitching depth that they have is insane. So my point is, if you add Glass now, their pitching dominance is out of this world. Out of this world. But he's got to stay healthy. And that's going to be a big issue, and I think that's why he's the X factor for their rotation. And for the bullpen, it's Michael Kopech. And the reason why I say it's Michael Kopech is last year he was on the Chicago White Sox, one of the worst team in MLB history. The worst. He gets traded to the Dodgers, and people realize, wow, this guy's really good. He's got nasty stuff. He is nasty. And I think with how deep their bullpen is, any of these guys can throw any inning. You could literally run one guy an inning, basically, and give up 0 runs every single day. But I really think with his age and how well he did last year, and given that most lineups have a lot of righties, I think Kopech could be the closer by the end of the season with how just nasty and overpowering his stuff is. And I really want to see if he can take that second half and extend on it and even get better. So yeah, I think he can be the biggest X factor for their bullpen. Now if we go to the Diamondbacks, it's got to load. Lineup wise, I would say their biggest X factor lineup wise, I'll give them 2. Number 1 is Corbin Carroll. He had a pretty good second half. A really good second half. He had a really bad first half. And I think if he can do what he did his rookie season, and then obviously the second half, that lineup is still going to be elite. The speed, the on-base percentage, the lower-end strikeout percentage, like he is going to be huge for them, especially if he can kind of keep it going, figure it out, stay healthy, and keep rolling on the second half. But I also want to mention Eugenio Suarez. The guy hit a lot of tanks for them last year. Now I understand like they're an on-base driven team, but if he can even give them 25 home runs, I believe he had 30 home runs last year. Actually, let me look at this. Eugenio Suarez stats 2024 home runs. He had 30. Yes, so I was right. He had 30 home runs last year. If he can give them 25 and keep his strikeout percentage roughly the same as last year, I mean, that just extends their lineup, and that kind of flips their lineup where they have it projected at 6, where it's like, all right, you get through this top half, not fun. Now it's like, all right, we're gonna calm down, but here comes Eugenio, his solo shots ready to go. Like you can't just pitch to him. You have to think, and you put guys on for the bottom of the lineup that you never want to do that. So I think he's their biggest X factor, and Carroll. I'll give it to the both of them. Rotation wise, I think it's Gallen. I hyped him up a lot earlier, but if he can be a true number 2, an Aaron Nola-esque number 2, the sky's the limit for this rotation. Because if he can get back to the consistency that we're used to, I mean, Gallen and Burns are a great 1-2 punch that in a series, if you face one of them, you're losing that game most of the time because of how much run production they're still going to have. And that's big. Having almost a guaranteed win every series is extremely important. So, I really like Gallen. I think he could be an X factor. Because I think if he's bad, then it's like, okay, it really is the Burns show with some decent depth. Kind of like the playoffs with the Orioles. Even the Orioles rotation kind of last year. But I think their lineup is also kind of similar to the Orioles of last year. So I think it would be a lot on Burns. And Burns is 30. Like, he's going to slowly decline. Maybe not this season, but I think if Gallen can really be strong, it takes a lot of pressure off of Burns and that lineup. As for the bullpen, I will be honest, I'm not extremely familiar with their bullpen. Um, but if I have to guess, you know what? Jordan Montgomery. If he's going to be in their bullpen, he needs to have a great season. If he has a great season, what that does for them is that gives them a Seth Lugo type long relief guy that the Mets used to have. I think the Mets might have this year with Clay Holmes, but we'll get to that in another episode. But yeah, Jordan Montgomery, if he can be 75% of what he was 2 years ago, and you get that out of your bullpen as a long relief guy, that lets a guy like Gallen and Kelly and Rodriguez, that if they have a rough start and it's like going to be a shootout, you can bring in Montgomery, and if he's been as effective as he was 2 years ago, or could be like a David Peterson of the second half last year for the Mets, and he can come out of that long relief, that could be huge, again, for limiting the runs. That's the number one thing the Diamondbacks have to do this season, is limit the amount of runs that they had given up. And they did that by getting Burns, but also Montgomery out of the bullpen could be huge. Could be massive. The Padres, okay, lineup-wise, their X factor, to be a contending team, if we're like, okay, you lost a lot, you really want to, it's Xander Bogaerts, which is kind of hard to do that because the decline has been unexpected, completely unexpected. But if Xander Bogaerts can give you, like I said with Jordan Montgomery, 75% of what he was 2 years ago, this lineup goes back to, okay, you lose Profar, you're filling it with Jason Hayward, you lose Higashioka, you lose a lot, but getting Xander back is huge for that. Huge for that. Because that top 1, 2, 3, 4, even Cronenworth, that top 5 is one of the best in baseball. Arias is an on-base machine. Tatis is Tatis. He's global. Jackson Merrill, I think, is going to take a leap. It's Jackson Merrill. That guy was amazing to watch last year. Machado's Machado. Cronenworth, again, is, I think, a really good Ha-Sung Kim level kind of guy. With, but Bogaerts could be that, like I had alluded to with Eugenio, like a good 6-hole guy that like you can't just pitch to, because if you pitch to him and he's as good as he used to be, 75% of what he was, he's going to take that ball over the fence. He's going to drive a double into the gap. And then you can't have a guy on with the bottom of the lineup, because even if just one, like as a pitcher, if one of them gets on base, you're getting their number 1 or number 2 hitter coming up in Arias or Tatis with 2 outs. So I think Xander has the ability to, if he can get back to what we're used to, could be huge for them. When we go to the rotation, I think it's Darvish, just because I think what we saw last year from Cease and King are going to continue, and I think this is a really nice rotation for Pivetta because he's the 4, and he can kind of take off a little bit of that backpack that he had to have last year with the Red Sox, and he has a much better lineup in front of him. But Darvish is going to be 38, 39 years old. He's getting old. He's getting very old, and the decline will eventually come, and we've seen it, but how bad of a decline could it be this year? And I'm hoping that it's great. I'm hoping that it's not a big decline. I'm hoping it's the same as last. If he could be the same as last year, this rotation again could be big. Like, there is a chance that the Padres could be a very good team this year. I just don't know if you can trust Darvish and Xander for their X factors. And the bullpen, I want to see Wandy Peralta get back to what Wandy Peralta was with the Yankees. I was a big Wandy guy. So he's a slight bit of an X factor. But I would say the bigger one is probably, I think, considering age and everything, I think you got to go with Adrian Morejon. Just because, again, there are a lot of really good lefties in this division. And if you can get him into that top, he's ranked 83 overall. If you can get him up into that top 50 range, like if he can take a big jump, that could be really big to have a guy that can come out of the bullpen as a lefty to throw against an Ohtani, throw against a Freeman, throw against a Corbin Carroll. You're going to need lefties in this division. And if he can have a big jump, if Wandy can have a big jump, that bullpen gets a lot deeper. Still not as good as if you had Tanner Scott, but it at least helps. It decreases that gap. Now when we go to the Giants, let's see. The Giants, is it not Mike Yastrzemski? And the reason why I say Yastrzemski is 2 years ago, Yastrzemski was great. And again, in this six hole the six hole, in my opinion, is one of the most important spots in your lineup if you get it right, because it extends the depth of your lineup without you even realizing. And I think you gotta go Mikey Yaz. Listen, the bottom, you know kind of what you're gonna get out of it. You like Chapman, you like Adames, you like Lamont Wade. Like you got good, decent top end stuff. You get Mikey Yaz going. He might climb for you, and then you get better overall depth. Either way, Mikey Yaz could be very big for them. Now, I know he's 34 and a half. I know he's been declining. But he's a Yastrzemski. He can do it. I believe. I believe in Mike Yastrzemski. Rotation. Hicks. It's probably Hicks. I mean, Verlander, you know roughly what you're getting out of him. Logan Webb, I think, is great as long as he can stay relatively healthy. But Hicks could be big. Because if Robbie Ray takes a decline, or if Verlander isn't that great, you really need a 3 to be competitive with this rotation and the rest of the NL. If Hicks takes that jump, then he can be your 3, and that can also take some pressure off of Verlander. Because if he's 42, Verlander's has some injury issues. He might not be there the whole year, so you really need him to be at that 3 level to be competitive. And the bullpen, again, I'm not extremely familiar with. But if X Factor wise, they have one lefty, and I'm going to go with that one lefty. It's been the common theme, and maybe I'm wrong. But, again, Miller. Actually, no. It's Camilo Doval. Because Camilo Doval, contract-wise and also what we think Camilo Doval is, he's phenomenal. But numbers-wise, he's taken a little bit of a step back from what we're used to. If Doval can get back to Doval, you have one of the best closers in the league. Period. Like, one of the best in the league. And I think getting him would just shut down that 9th inning. So nice for them. And with Walker, that your 9th and 8th inning are locks. They're locks every night. So you just need your rotation to get to that 6th inning. Because then you can have a spot guy in the middle of the 6th and the rest of the 7th. And then you have Walker and Doval, 8-9. So I really think going back to Doval would be huge for them. And the Rockies, their X Factors are kind of funny. Guys I want to see do good. I'm not going to do X Factors because realistically I don't think they can contend in the NL for the playoffs. But I'd like to see McMahon have a good year. Gets hit a lot of home runs. Chris Bryant, I would love to see him kind of turn the clock back a little bit. I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately, but I would love to see it. Some other guys, Nolan Jones, I think is a big question mark. I think what they thought they were going to get out of Nolan Jones was not what they got out of Nolan Jones. But I think if you can get Nolan Jones going early, and I think if he can get hot, I think the lineup becomes even that much more scarier. Then it becomes like, well, we're going to score 8 runs on them, but they might score 9. And trust me, I watched, right before the All-Star break last year, I watched them at Citi Field. They hit home runs. They might strike out a lot, but they will hit home runs. If you make a mistake pitch, they will rally quick. You can't just sleep on that lineup. It's a pretty solid lineup. I know there's a lot of Coors Field, like, the field. I don't care. You still got to hit the ball. And they hit the ball hard. They might strike out, but they hit the ball hard. Rotation, I guess maybe Freeland, just because his contract value is insane. I'm pretty sure he's making like $16 million next year. Kyle Freeland's making $16 million. So yeah, I guess Freeland would be the big X factor, but again, their rotation and bullpen. Anybody? Can anybody be really good? If any of them are really good, that's their X factor right there. Anybody in the bullpen. Oh, well, that's great. But yeah. So anyway, overall, that's my NL West review. The first official episode of the channel. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll be talking soon. Peace.